Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted questions and challenges by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to IB Unplugged. I'm John Patton.
And I'm Courtney Marline.
Today, we had the chance to speak with David Spooner about TOK, how it exists within and outside of that classroom itself. And it was an incredibly interesting conversation, which I think you're really going to enjoy.
Yep. David Spooner has been teaching TOK, philosophy, and English language and literature since 1999 in a variety of countries, including Ghana, the UK, Spain, Finland, Greece, Lebanon, Jordan, Italy, and now he's currently based in India. He's been an IB workshop leader since 2004, and he has a range of examining experience as well. In addition to this, he's been an IB verification visitor and consultant for schools wishing to adopt the diploma program and has collaborated with Cognity on a variety of projects. When he's not indulging his passions of traveling, rock climbing, hiking, photography, or lying on a beach doing nothing, my personal favorite, he is still enjoying teaching. So yeah, I agree. It's been a great conversation with him talking about demystifying TOK and really why it's not so mystical after all, which I think is a really nice breath of fresh air. He has a really pragmatic approach to like, this is not complicated.
Right.
This is just teaching students to be thinking about why they know what they know and really bringing it back down to these core pieces.
Yeah.
I really liked that we were talking about what makes a good TOK teacher. And again, it wasn't having this breadth of experience or having any kind of certain background in either their teaching or their learning, but it's about this humility, this approach to really caring about your students and thinking about how they are going to learn in the different subjects and really just bringing things down to having these important conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from a practical standpoint, for me, what really stood out is like, there are ways in which you can, TOK has lots of flexibility in terms of how you want to approach it. But one of the things that really stood out was the way he spoke about, you can bring other subjects into TOK and kind of use that as your vehicle by which you're teaching that, like, how do we know these things? But we also, the conversation also expanded into like, how can TOK exist in the other specific subjects themselves and make that a little bit more accessible for those subject teachers and of course also for the students as well.
Yeah. So with that, I think it's time to bring David in, and we hope you'll enjoy this episode. Hi, David. Welcome to IB Unplugged. We're so happy to have you here today.
Hi, Courtney. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored. I'm nervous, but I'm honored.
We are in good hands here having you as one of our guests. We've worked with you many, many times in the past, doing a lot of work on TOK, critical thinking. So I'm excited to talk to you today about demystifying TOK. So we like to start with all of our guests to answer a few warm-up questions. And the first one that we ask everybody to give a little bit of background to you and how you are in the place where you are now is, why education? Why did you choose education?
Oof, why education? My mother is still asking me that question to this day. And to be fair, most of my head teachers, once they get to know me, are still asking me that question. I think there are two reasons. One is the much more kind of prosaic, post-hoc, intellectual rationalization, right? Why am I still in education? I'm a child of the 70s, I guess. And in the 70s and early 80s, I read a lot of pedagogy, people like Ivan Illich, Deschooling Society, Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the oppressed. And the pedagogy of the oppressed stuck with me, even to this day. I think, as you know, Courtney, it's still the signature to my email. And his line was, there's no such thing as neutral education. Education either functions as an instrument to bring about conformity or freedom. And as a nonconformist myself, that resonated. And I find myself working with 16, 17, 18-year-olds who naturally are nonconformists. And if I can help to arm them with an understanding of how much freedom they have in the next 40, 50, 60 years of their lives, then that's why I do, why I continue to do what I do. The autobiographical reason is much more prosaic. I was a disaster at school. I finished grade 10 with 1 IGCSE to my name. And I had to leave school for a while because I didn't have the qualifications to continue. So I went to work, and I went to work down a coal mine. And because that was the major source of employment where I lived. And you've seen me. I'm a stick insect, and I'm really short. So I was never going to last in the coal mine. And so I went back to the school after about 6 months and said, "Please let me in." And the head of
I would like to try again, please.
Yes, that's right. Please, I begged. And the head of sixth form was also the person who had been teaching me to rock climb. And he accepted that I could have a second chance, provided I also went to night school during my 2 years of senior school. And basically, I wanted to be him. He was tall and handsome. He had a drop-dead gorgeous wife. He'd read all the right things that I wanted to read. And so my real reason for wanting to become a teacher was because I wanted to be Mark Greenop. Unfortunately, I'm 5'0", so the tall, handsome part of it was never going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, no. Oh, man.
I just also love the idea. It sounds like a silly way of threatening your child to be like, if you don't do well in school, you're going to the mines.
Ooh, yeah. You can hang that over their heads. Huh?
That's some incentive there.
Quite, yeah. I mean, I don't know if either of you have ever been down a coal mine, but they're not the most salubrious places.
No. It's a place you go to think.
Right. Well, it's literally Socrates' cave, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And I've never actually thought about that, John, before, but I think you've put me on to my next great thought. Working down a coal mine is how Socrates became Socrates.
There you go. Yeah. I like what you were mentioning at the start there with regard to like education either creates more freedom or it essentially creates more like regulation, essentially, or sort of like driving society in the way that we want to put it. So I guess with that in mind, from your position, how do you see education evolving and changing over the course of the next decade? What might that future of secondary education look like?
I suppose if I were talking with two people other than yourselves, I'd probably have to say something like artificial intelligence, yada, yada, blah, 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 is going to change the way education is conceived of. And I'd probably have to throw in a few made-up statistics about 99% of jobs that students are going to get haven't yet been invented. And but I'm not going to say that because I have too much respect for the both of you and for education, quite frankly. I don't think much is going to change, but something has to change. Years ago, when I had managed to beg my way back into senior school, I had to study Charles Dickens's Hard Times. And chapter 2 has always stayed with me. Dickens writes this scorching satirical critique of a utilitarian education system. He describes students as vessels into which knowledge has to be poured. And here we are in 2025, and if you read that description that he's satirizing, nothing much has changed. And yet the world around us is changing exponentially with every year that passes. So we have in the IB a couple of beautiful models for how the diploma itself could evolve with the middle years program and the primary years program. We have a model also with the Combined Sciences project in the diploma, which could act as a blueprint for what the diploma program and other similar programs like the AP system in the States, British A-levels, the CBSE here in India, how they need to change. Until, however, all of those systems come out from under the diktat of Ofqual, the universities are always going to be able to dictate to secondary and senior schools what we need to do. What I would love to see evolving is that we start to tell universities what they need to do to change. And we need to start telling them what kind of students we're going to be sending them. So my fear is that nothing much will change. But we're in a kind of Maginot Line. We are the last bastion of defense of education. And so something has to give. Something's got to give. But I'll be dead in about 10 years, so I have no idea.
It's not your problem anymore.
Right, exactly.
Good luck, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you've taught quite a few different subjects through the IB over the years. And I think that we've worked most closely with you for theory of knowledge. You've worked on cognitive resources, you've done workshops, things like that. And so when we were talking about what we could focus this podcast episode on, we ended up landing on this idea of demystifying TOK. And the word demystifying was chosen quite deliberately. And I'm just wondering what you find so mystical about TOK that we're going to then demystify it.
I find nothing at all mystical about it. I think at the root of TOK, it's really very simple. The problem is that over the various iterations of the course since the days of Alec Peterson in the late 1960s, early 1970s, what has happened to the IB itself? What has happened to the state of international secondary education means that the description of what TOK is, the guides that have been published for TOK have made it seem like this kind of esoteric thing that one needs to have read an entire library of Alexandria in order to understand. Sometimes the way it's presented in workshops, not TOK workshops, so much as subject workshops where they have to do a TOK bit, makes it seem either impenetrable or beyond the ken of most subject specialists. And so it ends up becoming for colleagues, including some TOK teaching colleagues, as well as students, this thing which is kind of, there's some ephemeral aspect to it that nobody can grasp. And that understanding, I think, has been not necessarily promoted, but allowed to gain traction.
Yeah.
But at heart, TOK is really simple. It's asking one question. How do you know what you claim to know? And the job then of a TOK teacher becomes to remind everybody, students and colleagues alike, that fundamentally that's the only thing we're interested in talking about in TOK. That fundamentally in every other subject, that's what teaching colleagues and students of chemistry or physics or whatever it might be, that's all they're interested in discussing as well. I was, like everybody, I'm a member of about a gazillion professional WhatsApp groups and social media groups. And I was telling some of my colleagues on these groups that I was going to be joining you for this podcast, and how nervous I was and whatever. And I gave a taste of some of the questions that I thought you might be asking me, and saying, what do you think? Why do you think they've called it Demystifying TOK? And one colleague wrote to me that TOK is a byproduct of the combination of all other subjects. And I took a step back and I thought, is that the right way to think about TOK? Is it a byproduct of chemistry, literature, and so on? Or is it, in fact, at the very heart of chemistry and literature and so on? And the fact that my colleague made that comment, and saw TOK as being some kind of offshoot of all of the other proper academic subjects, proved to me that we have allowed it to become this mystical thing that only the cognoscenti are allowed to understand. And we've gotten away from this understanding that certainly Alec Peterson had at the birth of the IB, that it's a very simple question TOK asks. Right. How do you know what you claim to know?
And I think when educators or coordinators, if we might be giving a presentation to our students, when we have a deeper understanding of exactly that question and how that is really the foundation of all of our subjects, it changes the way that we can perceive it. So as you say, if it's constantly, like if you look at any particular syllabus or guide for any of the courses, often it'll be like, here's a TOK link and here's a TOK link. And so it can feel like, oh, this is an add-on to what we're supposed to be doing. And then oftentimes, like even in presentations with students, or sometimes you hear people trying to describe the course to people who don't know anything about the IB. And the number of times I'll hear somebody say, oh, it's kind of like a philosophy course. It's almost like, well, that makes it even more distant, Daunting. It feels like it's not really tangible anymore. And instead, just coming back to that fundamental thing you just said, how do we know? And really that becomes the basis of all the things that we are really learning, which I think is far more accessible. And I think if we start with that, then it becomes a little bit more part of everything that we're doing. And with that in mind, I mean, obviously you've been in the IB world for quite a bit of time. I think around 20 years now, or possibly even more. I wonder, could you guide us through your TOK journey? Like, how did you first get involved? I mean, obviously, I'm going to attest that every teacher is a TOK teacher, but how did you first get involved? Like, really taking the reins in it, and finding this is my actual, like, my heart. Like, I love this subject and really want to do this. I want to be identified as like TOK all the time.
What an interesting question. I mean, I suspect, like most TOK teachers, I was just given it in one of my first international schools in Greece. They took a look at my degree, philosophy, and they said, right, Spooner, this is your bag, right? And I took a look at the guide, the syllabus, and I thought, I got this. I've got degrees in philosophy. This is right up my alley. And I spent a year with that kind of arrogant confidence that only philosophy teachers can have. And then at the end of my first year of teaching it, I was sent to my first IB TOK workshop. And at the end of that week, they were a week long back then, because thank you, John, for reminding everybody I'm as old as the hills. I realized I
have a job to do. I gotta get that out there.
Fair enough. I realized at the end of that week that I'd been doing it wrong for the whole year, and that I'd fundamentally misunderstood TOK, because I too read theory of knowledge, which is a branch of philosophy. And I thought what you need in order to teach this is philosophy. And it had completely not registered on my radar that the reason there's an IB diploma philosophy course separate to TOK is for a reason. That's philosophy. Right. This is not. So I went back to school and I completely re-engineered how I was thinking about TOK. And subsequent to that, I became at some point an IB TOK workshop leader. And I kept meeting lots of TOK teachers, some new, some seasoned. And they all helped me. That experience of trying to help other teachers to understand TOK helped me completely recalibrate the purpose of TOK. And we are where we are now. I'm currently reading a newly published book called Open Socrates by an academic called Agnes Callard. And I'm only about 30 pages in, but her take is unique. She was asking the question, how did Socrates, the man, become Socrates, the idea? And the simple revelation that Socrates had was that all you need in order to become Socrates is to admit your intellectual humility and to admit that whatever it is you think you know, you still have to demonstrate that you have good reasons for knowing it. And without having read Callard's book 20 odd years ago, I think that was what I began to learn after my disastrous first year of being a TOK teacher, that I assumed that the purpose was for me to teach stuff to kids rather than take stuff that they had been taught or were learning about in chemistry or French or whatever and subject it to Socratic interrogation. I still don't know whether I'm succeeding.
That's the practice determined. Of an educator.
But I think to that point, that's always something that you talk about in your workshops. Is it's not about the content of TOK. It's not. I mean, it shouldn't necessarily always be about the content in any of the subject classes either. But really about the impact of learning TOK, not just to your other classes, but as a learner and all of that. And so I'd love for you to kind of talk about that, the impact of the TOK style thinking and learning that it can have on these students.
See, you mentioned content, and one of the beautiful things, but also one of the mystifying things about TOK is that it's content free. If I look at the aims and objectives for the TOK course, we're supposed to build on the content that students are learning about in their other IB diploma subjects. So the stimuli for discussion should be taken from the stuff that students are learning about in their other IBDP subjects. So there is no TOK content. What there is reflection on content that they're being exposed to in their other subject classes. When I teach TOK, there's nothing that I use as stimulus material that they haven't seen in their economics class or in their physics or biology classes. It's just that we're looking at it in a different way. So I hear this phrase sometimes that you just use, Courtney, TOK style thinking. I don't think there is such a thing. Over and above the fact that there's nothing chemistry style thinking about doing chemistry. There's thinking about chemistry and there's not thinking about chemistry. And as long as we're thinking about the foundational assumptions, the axioms, if you like, that chemists, physicists, literary experts, visual artists have, then that could be described as TOK style thinking. But hopefully the visual arts teachers and the chemistry teachers are also thinking about and discussing the foundational assumptions and axioms in their own subjects. So I don't think there's anything TOK thinking-y about what we do in TOK.
Certainly, just having that position of like, how do I know this? And constantly kind of having that rattling in your head whenever you're approaching any kind of thing, it probably shifts the way that you might approach it. I mean, like if you think of other types of curricula where, you mentioned at the beginning, the student is a vessel and I'm going to pour some knowledge into them. And in many curricula settings, it's like, okay, now pour it back and show me that you've received it, right? It's that sort of idea. But, what I really appreciated about what I would say TOK style thinking, I guess, or just like thinking with more of a critical mind, is just like, how do I know this? And I guess, if that question is constantly permeating not just your subjects, but then it suddenly permeates every aspect of your life, then I think that that creates a better, more peaceful world, because you end up with people who are more critical about the knowledge they're acquiring. They understand their own position as a knower, and they then are critical of their own position, really. Like, I know these things and I know this to be true, but that's also because of the background I've had. And I think, yes, as a biology, I'm a biology teacher, I can infuse that quite a bit with like scientific theory and that sort of thing, but there's more.
Again, you've used one of my bête noire phrases, right? Critical thinking. And as Courtney knows, to her cost, I don't believe there's any such thing as critical thinking. I think there's thinking and there's not thinking. But it depends what you're thinking about that determines whether or not that thinking is valuable. So as educators, I come back to this very simple overarching question. How do you know what you claim to know? On what basis are you justifying your knowledge claim, if you like? And for me, that is thinking. And there's nothing critical about it. It's just thinking. If you're not doing that, then arguably you're not actually thinking. You're just studying, learning, regurgitating accepted truths, and so on.
Does that include challenging your own biases then? So like if I'm just thinking and there's some value there, am I just by like challenging the way that I think about something, that still is just thinking itself, not necessarily being critical about that?
Absolutely. I love playing devil's advocate, and I love trying to encourage my students to play devil's advocate. Because the best way to test out the strength of your own ideas and beliefs and claims to know is by taking the contrary position and looking for holes and lacunae in it, and looking for problems in it. And only then, when you have that kind of self-examining Socratic, I promise that's the last time I'll use the word Socratic.
He's getting a lot of cushion here, huh?
He is, yeah. I didn't buy shares in it. I should have done, but I might be old, but I'm not 2,500 years old, so I missed the boat on that one. If you're self-examining, then you are thinking. If you're not, then arguably you're not even thinking. Whatever it is you're doing is not thinking. You might be cogitating, you might be reflecting, but it's not necessarily thinking. So absolutely, the first person you have to hold to account is yourself.
Today's COG tip was submitted by Vanetta Hinkovska from the American College in Sofia, who says, "My top tip for using Cognity is leveraging the strength tests to personalize student learning. I assign targeted quizzes based on student weaknesses, allowing them to focus on specific areas for improvement while saving time on content they've already mastered. I find this tip particularly helpful because it makes learning more efficient and personalized. By focusing on individual student weaknesses, cognitive strength tests help reinforce key concepts without overwhelming students with unnecessary repetition. This targeted approach boosts confidence, maximizes progress, and saves valuable class time. I think so much of the points that you always make, things that you're really promoting with TOK, is how embedded it should be in the entire program and the entire way of teaching and educating. Do you feel like, in a way, teaching TOK as an individual subject kind of holds that back or makes it even harder? Or do you think it's easier to integrate into your other lessons in the other subjects?
Again, I'm a kind of iconoclast in this respect. I mean, I go back to the original sort of founding intentions of TOK, the Alec Peterson years in the 70s and 80s, right? The whole raison d'etre behind TOK was to eventually see it disappear and to be subsumed into other subjects. But that never happened. And I suspect there are a certain sort of structural reasons why it could never happen. So at one and the same time, I'm not a fan of integrating TOK into other subjects in order to keep the spirit of TOK alive. Rather, I flip that on its head. I'm a fan of integrating other subjects into TOK in order to better respect the spirit, the aims and objectives of TOK. And having TOK as a separate standalone subject really sort of encourages students and colleagues to see TOK as this additional extra that I don't have to do TOK in my class because Spooner does it, right? And there's a lesson there for Spooner to do it.
Right.
And as a consequence of that, the argument in favor of giving it more than just 1.5 bonus points and a cuddly teddy bear in the whole matrix of the 45 points thing.
You get teddy bears? You get a teddy bear.
If you do really well, you get a teddy bear. Ollie Becker sends you a personal Finnish cuddly teddy bear from the frozen wastelands of northern Finland.
I knew I liked him. Well, it lends itself very much to kind of, I would be in a position where I would say like TOK is probably one of the most important, if not the most important thing that we're able to teach young people, especially before they go on to possible university life, or if they go just straight into the world of work. Like that general idea of how do I know these things, and just really being, questioning as they go, that deep inquiry. But, then I sit here as a DP coordinator, and I go, well, I recognize the EE and the TOK in combination have a maximum of 3 points. And I just think, but it's so much more important than that. And I guess, does it kind of belittle the course when we say like, oh, it's only worth this? I mean, do students then just kind of, oh, that's just the add-on, that's the other thing. It's done in whatever, I think 90 hours or whatever it is. That's it. And now I can focus on my real subjects. Does it kind of belittle it then when you pull it out that way?
I think it has come to belittle it. I guess where I take my succor from is the fact that, and as educators yourselves, that whenever students return from university or write to you years later, it's not what I taught them in either my philosophy class or my English language and literature class that they're remembering. It's not even what I taught them in TOK that they remember, but how I taught them in TOK and how their experiences of doing TOK and having TOK allow them to reflect critically on what they were learning in their other subjects. That's what they carry with them. It's not the content that they learn in chemistry or Langenlit that they remember. They forget about that pretty soon after the exams. But it's the pedagogical approach that makes it worthwhile. Now, try telling your average DP1 or even DP2 student that they won't benefit from TOK until years later, or they won't see the benefit until years later. And they will laugh in your face quite rightly. But I know this to be the case. And so I'm indifferent, I think, to the fact that it's only worth 1.5 points in the matrix. And we've only got 100 hours, and students sometimes see it as the sacrificial lamb that gets in the way. I can't concern myself with those things. And the only thing I can do is concern myself with the fact that at least I have them for 100 hours over 18 months. And at least I can help them see how TOK, even if they're looking at TOK from a purely utilitarian perspective, if I can help them see how that level of critical reflection can help them in their IAs or in their higher level extension options in other subjects, if I can embed in them those, I'll use your phrase, John, critical thinking skills that will
there we go.
become useful later on, then that's what I'm going to do. The extraneous stuff, it's only worth 1.5 points. I can't care about that.
It almost seems like a tension exists then with because there would almost be a benefit to just saying there's no points with this, right? There's no points you're getting on this. It's just a fundamental skill that we're going to then apply everywhere else. But if you say that to a 16, 17-year-old student, they go, right, then I don't need to care about this whatsoever. So you add a little bit to kind of satisfy that sort of quantitative hunger that exists with some people. But, I guess it's sort of towing the line between the two.
If it moves, give it a grade. Right.
How do you get your students to care about TOK then? You do get buy-in, but how do you feel because I feel like that might be one of the bigger challenges for the new TOK teachers who are already maybe a bit more insecure. How do you get that buy-in just from your own students, but then also from the other teachers too?
What a nice question. You have to ask my students about whether or not I get their buy-in. I could answer by simply saying I have a really charming personality, and I bend them to my will by sheer force of that charming personality. But again, this kind of brings us back to one of your initial questions. What does my TOK journey look like? I realized years ago that the idea of integrating TOK into other subjects was never going to work. So what I do for those utilitarian students who want their 7s in maths and physics and that's the end of the world to them, is by incorporating aspects of those other subjects into TOK, making those the basis of TOK. And by making them realize that for example, the upper mark bands in the higher level extensions or the IAs in their other subjects can best be achieved by thinking about the stimuli from those subjects in a TOK way. Okay, you've beaten me now. I'm going to start talking about TOK style
We've gotten you to
thinking,
use all
right?
of that. Exactly.
I'm sold.
There you go. I think good teaching includes elements of here's how we've come to understand this. How do we know this? Well, so whatever subject you're teaching, that's in you, right? That you become an educator because you're trying to essentially educe that from other people and just figure out how do we know this? Let's think about that. Where did that come from? So I would almost suggest that TOK exists, or that TOK teacher is kind of in every teacher that's out there. How do we essentially kind of pull that out a little bit more? Because I totally buy into what you're saying. I want to take every other subject and bring it into TOK. And I also think there's a good space where TOK can be present in all the other subjects. How do we kind of pull that out of those teachers as well, who want to incorporate some of this stuff and want to do it quite well, but maybe feel tied to their curricula?
I mean, it's the TOK teacher or TOK coordinator's constant struggle, right? And this is why instead of organizing the teaching of TOK around the knowledge framework or the areas of knowledge or the optional themes or whatever, we have 12 concepts, and all of those concepts are embedded fundamentally in all of the different subjects. 4 or 5 of those 12 foundational TOK concepts are the founding concepts for economics, a different 4 or 5 of them for the natural sciences, and so on and so forth. So the best place to make that connection with TOK is right at the very beginning of a unit of study. Why are you teaching this unit of study in biology or in business management or in ESS? You're teaching it because you want to transmit certain concepts to them. Where else do you come across those same concepts? Well, in TOK, which is based on the concepts. So begin the teaching of units with those concepts. But remind yourself, or rather ask yourself continually the question, why, when I was a callow 18-year-old, did I choose to go to university to study chemistry or economics? Now, there may be some kind of practical or utilitarian reasons, but fundamentally, you were deep down interested in the founding concepts of economics or chemistry or whatever. You were fundamentally interested, for want of a better phrase, in the philosophy of the natural sciences. So I think it kind of behoves every educator to remind themselves of when at the age of 19, they packed their bags and went off to university to study history, knowing that they would never get a great paycheck from studying history or philosophy or literature. But there was something fundamental about the nature of those subjects and their power to explain the real world that motivated them to choose that in the first place. Remind students that that's what you did, and remind students that that remains at the heart of the stuff that they're studying. Zygotes in and of themselves are not really interesting things to study, right? But what does the study of zygotes tell us about the natural world and the human relationship with the natural world? I mean, nobody ever went to die because of mathematics. Nobody falls in love because of amoeba and knowledge about amoeba. People fall in love because of concepts. They choose to fight and die for their nation, not because of factual stuff, but because of concepts. It's concepts that rule our everyday lives. And those concepts are at the heart of both the other DP subjects and at the heart of TOK. So make that link at the beginning of every unit of study or whatever it's called, and remind students that that is being dealt with in TOK.
Yeah, I completely buy into that, and I think that's something that at Cognity we really buy into also, and that's why in all of our textbooks we have the big picture at the beginning of every unit. And then, we'll talk to students, we get student feedback, and all the time they're like, yeah, we don't read the big picture.
Right.
But this is supposed to make you care about it. And they're like, yeah, but it's not on the test.
Right. I mean, this is why you choose to teach zygotes, not because it's going to be an exam question, but for some reason you love zygotes. So transmit that love for amoeba or Petri dishes, do it that way.
Yeah. But I love it. That becomes far like the more exciting element. And I imagine, just as you said, if you kind of link it to the concepts, if you link it to the bigger things that we can all care about as humans basically on this planet, then suddenly it becomes a lot more meaningful. And I would guess, like, regardless of if you were a brand new teacher just kind of doing TOK itself, or if you're quite experienced, that would probably be a great place to start. Start with, like, let's get those concepts out. Let's get kids excited about what we're learning in this respect. Are there other sort of things that you might suggest to, like, early teachers or like teachers who are just kind of figuring out that TOK, or for people who've been doing it for a long time, and, like, here's ways that you can help to guide those younger teachers?
I mean, my short answer to that question, sadly, is no.
You're on your own. Figure it out.
Right. Get on with it. I had to, so should you.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I think that there are, of course, that's the kind of sarcastic answer, but there's a grain of truth in that no as well, because we come back to the mystical question, right? The way in which to overcome the fear of TOK, and to understand that you're already doing TOK because of your reasons for having chosen to become a teacher or a chemist or whatever in the first place,
right,
is because you don't have to know all that much about other stuff in order to be a good TOK teacher. All you have to have is that passion for asking that fundamental question. How do you know what you claim to know? Do you have good reasons or just reasons for arguing X? What counts as evidence in your subject? And how do you distinguish any evidence from good evidence? Now, all of that stuff is already being taught by you, learnt by students in your home subject, if you like. In TOK, that's the same set of questions that you're asking, just about a very disparate range of subjects. If you're a history teacher, you don't need to know a lot of complicated mathematics, because there will always be some 17-year-old smart kid who will delight in explaining to the rest of the class in front of your face how little you know about mathematics. But run with it. We're not there to learn about mathematics. We're there to ask much more foundational questions. So forget the fear, because there's nothing mystical about TOK. And the questions, the only questions we're interested in TOK are questions that you are already asking in your home subject. So just ask those in TOK about different stimulus materials.
Yeah. If you were kind of looking for, let's say at your school, you were going to hire another TOK teacher. And like you said, you don't go and study, how do I become a TOK teacher? Usually it ends up either being thrown on you in your case or something like that. But if you were really trying to get to the heart of it and you were hiring a TOK teacher, like what would you look for? What would be kind of those really powerful things that would make you confident of this person will thrive in this role?
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about it before. I would look for...
I know, I didn't send it to you. I'm sorry.
I'd look for somebody who desired to become a mini-me. I'd look for... I'd look for somebody who understood that TOK is not a subject. That TOK is not a subject where there is stuff to be taught, who was comfortable enough in their own skin to be able to deal with challenging questions about the very nature of their own subject, history or literature or whatever it might be, and who was prepared to work with uncertainty, epistemological uncertainty. I mean, once again, we come back to Socrates, right? I mean, why was it the oracle at Delphi said to whoever it was that the wisest man on earth was Socrates, he who professed to know nothing about anything? And of course, we know the riddle of the Sphinx at Delphi meant that the reason he's wise is because he knows nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I think I would weed potential TOK teachers out on the basis of their assumption or not about the strength of their own beliefs. If they appear to lack intellectual humility, then they're never going to become a good TOK teacher.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Becoming a better IBDP educator is a daily practice informed through reading, research, personal experience, and episodes from IB Unplugged, like the one you're listening to right now. But sometimes the show can go a bit too quickly, or we simply forget some of the key points once we're out of the car or back from our walk. So to revisit the content in a condensed version, you can download the episode summary at cognity.com/IB Unplugged. You'll find useful links to other resources and exciting bits of information that you can use immediately in your daily practice. So now, back to the show.
So, I mean, we've spoken a lot about how TOK, you can either take other subjects and kind of bring it into TOK, or vice versa, how every educator kind of has that sort of TOK, position. And yet, at the same time, TOK does exist as a course. It's its own particular course that does have specific learning outcomes, and ways of knowledge and areas of knowledge, or ways of knowing and areas of knowledge, and that sort of thing. And so it provides a scaffolding that also has with it tons of choice for that TOK teacher in terms of how they want to approach it, how they want to get those things through. And so I guess in your experience, like what do you think is kind of the most overlooked aspect, or things that kind of fall through the cracks? Like people kind of reach for the low hanging fruit and they say, yeah, this is the thing. We're all going to get this. What do we miss often when we look at that TOK course?
We see the word politics and we imagine it to have a big P, right? A capital P, meaning governmental politics or parliamentary politics. But if I go back to the old kind of feminist rallying cry of the 1980s, the personal is political. And if we kind of seek to understand that knowledge and politics is not about parliamentary or governmental politics, but about human interrelations, then I think we can begin to get much closer to the heart of TOK. How do we understand human relations and human behavior within those relations? And I think by the same token, knowledge and indigenous societies is another optional theme, which is often overlooked. We take a look at the word indigenous, and we think flags, food, and funny costumes, right? And we reduce it to that.
Or being too scared to even go near it with a 10-foot pole of like, there's no way I'm going to be able to get this right.
You're right. I don't want to be accused of cultural appropriation or, some offense against a group of people that I'd only heard of yesterday. So why do I say that? I mean, we were having a discussion in TOK class a couple of months ago with my DP1 students, and we started to think about the scientific method as an example of an indigenous knowledge system, because it's not universal. It never was universal, right? It's a product of the European Enlightenment. And so there are different ways of looking at the relationship between inert and reactive materials. There are certain cultures, including scientific cultures, that don't make the distinction between the inert and the reactive substances. But the scientific method insists that that's an absolute universal distinction, right? The Linnaean classification system in biology is not value-free. It's not culture-free.
Right.
And so if we take a different approach to the themes of knowledge and politics and knowledge and indigenous societies and begin to think about the way in which those things we take for granted in other subjects, like Keynesian macroeconomics, and think about whether they might be an indigenous knowledge system or a product of an indigenous knowledge system, and in what ways might that be the case, then we begin to push back on some of the assumptions that we have about certain other subjects and their kind of objective infallibility.
It becomes the critical place where you can actually have true intercultural understanding, right? And you can develop a little bit more of that intercultural understanding and respect, which is, of course, right in that mission of the IB. But, so often we kind of get pulled into, like, for lack of a better term, a Western sort of approach of thinking without recognizing that there's many different ways of knowing that are actually very valid, and we need to be considering them as well.
Indeed. Without reducing the indigenous to a set of stereotypes, which I think we, through not necessarily through any fault of our own, we see the word and we assume that that's what it must be dealing with. So we go off on tangents, teaching about the language of the Piranha tribe in Brazil, or Dreamtime for Australian Aboriginals, without realizing that the European Enlightenment, which gave us the scientific method, is as much a product of a particular indigeneity and a particular cultural time and place as anything else is. And I think at the same time, here's where I become critical of the IB learner profile attributes. Can we possibly look at them as a product of a particular culture and a particular set of assumptions about other cultures?
Sure.
I'm always reminded of that beautiful kind of Ubuntu idea. I am because we are. Whereas IB learner profile attributes, sometimes perhaps the whole mission of the IB itself is very egocentric. And we can blame René Descartes for this, and I do. And we can blame Sigmund Freud for not allowing Descartes to die in peace. And this idea that great individuals are responsible for great breakthroughs has allowed us to fail to remember that every intellectual tradition in whatever area of knowledge started somewhere, and started in a particular culture and a particular time and place. And to try to separate whatever the idea is from those cultural and intellectual origins is like trying to take the egg out of a cake which has already been baked. Oh, I like that. I might use that again.
I was going to say, that's a good one. I'm going to use that.
I think you've now taught TOK in quite a few schools, and in some schools, I think you've been able to maybe thrive in the program more than in others. And I'm not asking to name drop anything, but more reflecting on what are some of the conditions or school cultural aspects that make you feel like it creates a better environment for TOK to thrive, and for therefore a TOK teacher to thrive, or teachers teaching TOK?
What a nice question. And I think the short answer to that is one that will resonate with TOK teachers all around the world, I suspect. How education itself is seen by the local society, for want of a better word, has a great deal of impact. If education is respected, then teachers are given a lot more leeway to be the risk takers that the IB wants us to model for our students. So, as you know, Courtney, I spent 6 years living and working in Finland. And whenever educators say Finland, we plug into those nonsense ideas about how there are no exams and etc. Right? You can't take the Finnish education system out of Finland because the various variables mean that it only works in Finland. You can try and export some aspects of it, but the the society that you're importing into them won't necessarily see those variables in the same way. So in Finland, I was pretty much left alone to my own devices. Teachers were pretty much left alone to be the trusted professionals that we were. As a result, I think we were able to get on with the job. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Why does Finland end up towards the top of the PISA tables with monotonous regularity? It's because something works in that climate, right? In other environments where education is not held in such high esteem, where educators are seen as vehicles for delivering a string of 7s and 6s to their charges, then that doesn't create an environment where TOK can flourish because it becomes transactional. Education itself becomes transactional and TOK even more so. And so I think it very much depends ultimately on how education and educators are viewed by the surrounding environment. It's not a very sophisticated answer to your question, I'm afraid, but I think at the as John reminded me, at the tender age of 59, I think this is the conclusion I've come to.
No, I think it's a great answer. And I think that sometimes the more straightforward answer is usually has a lot of value in it too, of this idea of stripping it all back, of it's not going to be all of the sophisticated professional learning development, blah, blah, blah. It's, do you have the space to be able to be the risk taker, to be able to do your job, to be able to work with the children?
Yeah, and do we respect that position?
Right.
Do we not just respect it, but value the idea of like, I'm going to be in the space as an educator trying new things, and that effectively comes right back to what you were talking about earlier with regard to like essentially a level of humility. Like I'm going to come into this and I'm going to figure things out on my own, or I'm going to figure things out in the process. I'm not expected to know all these things right away, but if I can fundamentally come back to that question of like, how do I know what I know? And can I help other people figure that out as well? Then really, you create inspirational moments for young people to see the concepts that bridge all their different topics. You create moments for teachers to recognize that they can teach TOK, or they could bring that into their classrooms, et cetera. And then obviously you create like a community around that says, no, this is something we value. And we're not necessarily just coming down to the utilitarian, get those points, but rather let's create young people who go on to, be positive contributors to society.
This has been fun. Not so nervous, huh?
Is it over
It's
already?
It's that time.
I mean, I could sit here all day.
I thought all of those were just warm-up questions. I was,
we just stayed in the warm-up the whole time. Yeah. No, David, it's been really, really fun chatting with you. I really appreciate your perspective, and I really like the way that you were talking about these things. It helped me. I feel like I grew quite a bit just listening to you, so I appreciate it.
It's been lovely. Thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed having to think about your questions before I was able to formulate a response, and I think the value of those questions again serves to remind me that as educators we got to be reflective practitioners, right? And so if I'm not continually asking myself the sorts of questions that you guys have just thrown at me in the warm-up, then I'm going to turn into the old fossil that you think I already am.
Oh, certainly not. Certainly not. No.
You're as old as you feel, and you keep busy. You've been doing fantastic work over the years, and you do a lot.
Oh, bless you. Well, I mean, we're members of the species Homo sapiens sapiens, right? So once I stop using this, I give up the right to continue being a member of the human species. That's what I keep telling myself. My head teachers over the years tell me that I'm too much of a child to remain in their employment. So I've got to find a balance at some point between my actual age and my age in here, right?
I wouldn't worry about it.
No.
Yeah, I don't. That's why I keep getting fired, because I don't worry about it too much.
Yeah. We'll edit that out. Yeah.
I'm an open book, John. You can keep that in if you wish.
I've gathered as much. No, I appreciate it. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David. As always, it's such a pleasure to have these conversations with you. It's a lot of fun to, dive into these topics and not just have that very technical conversation about this is how you teach these pieces of TOK, but really, what does it actually look like? What does it feel like? And how can we do this better?
This was a reminder of what it's like to be human. So thank you. I've really enjoyed this.
No,
Good.
thank you, David. Lots of fun.
Us too.
All
Great.
right.
All right. Well, thank you so much and have a good rest of your day.
I can't wait for round 2.
Yes, us too.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marline and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic request or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.